now that you have started Essay 1 and most of you have written your first draft, I wanted to give you an example of my response to another student from a previous semester's of Essay 1, okay? So this student wrote on a topic similar to yours, not exactly the same. In this class, we're not reading a book called Breath, Eyes, Memory, but in this class, with the sample, we did read this book, and we also read Sister Flowers by Maya Angelou. So please read the topic. Okay, so the first thing you need to do is analyze the assigned topic. And I would say from this topic, the last two sentences are the most important. That's what you're supposed to write about. Describe qualities of female characters and a woman or women in your life. Okay? So, let's look at what the student wrote. Here's the introduction. The introduction should introduce the readers and the characters and also contain a thesis statement. Harmonious relationships between mothers, daughters, and grandmothers, sisters, and friends make a stronger, prouder, and richer individual. I noted examples of such relationships in two of our readings, Sister Flowers by Maya Angelou and Breath, Eyes, Memory by Edwidge Dandicott. It would be certain to say that Sister Flowers made Marguerite proud to be black and be herself. Then we have Sophie, a Haitian girl whose aunt loved her like a mother, which made Sophie feel special and beloved. My inspiration in my life was my grandmother. In these two stories, like in my own life, three women influenced younger people in positive ways. Okay, so this paragraph does indeed introduce the readings, briefly introduces these two characters, the book that you haven't read, the characters of Sophie and the aunt are introduced, and finally the writer introduces the grandmother, and she has a good thesis statement. Take a look at that. In these two stories, like in my own life, three women influenced younger people in positive ways. When we read that sentence, it's like a plan for the rest of the essay. We expect to see the body of the essay talk about these three women who influenced younger people. So, each body paragraph, and by the way, there should be 3+ paragraphs to support the thesis. Each paragraph should have a topic sentence that states the main idea of that paragraph, and in using ideas from reading, there should be the introductory phrase, quote or paraphrase, and explanation, which we learned in the video in week 1. And it's optional to have a concluding sentence at the end of a body paragraph. So let's see what the student did, and I'll show you what I marked up. The first body paragraph is short, and that's why I added some suggestions at the bottom here. But let's start with the first sentence. Good topic sentence. Sister Flowers is a story about how an older woman influenced a young girl. Okay? So far, so good. This middle part here is all about the story and how Mrs. Flowers influenced Marguerite, teaching her about communication, reading books. But this part doesn't have much specific detail. So that's my suggestion in the comments and questions at the end of the paragraph. Add more specific details. What did Mrs. Flowers teach Sophie? How was Sophie's life changed? So this paragraph is not developed enough. It does, however, have sort of a concluding sentence. Good advice from this great woman made her proud of what she really was. Maybe we ought to change her to Marguerite, because there's two women in here and it might not be clear who her is, okay? All right, next paragraph. Now look and see what I've marked. The second heroic figure was Tante Ati, Sophie's aunt who raised her and helped her develop into a positive young girl, okay? Notice that this is the topic sentence, and I added a suggested line in red because this topic sentence needs to talk about the influence that the aunt had on Sophie. And it didn't do that. It just mentioned that there was this aunt, Tante Ati. Okay? Then I marked this line in the middle. Okay? By the way, you can stop this presentation and read these paragraphs more closely after you watch the whole thing. So I marked these lines because they talk about how the aunt and Sophie's mother were poor when they were children, and they had to work in the cane fields. I didn't think that really related to how the aunt cared for Sophie. So I asked the writer to replace these two sentences and talk more about how the aunt cared for Sophie. This last bit here does relate to the aunt and the young girl, Sophie. And it includes a quote. The aunt once said, "Love is like rain. It comes in a drizzle sometimes, then it starts pouring, and if you're not careful, it will drown you." That's a great quote, but what does it mean? So remember from last week's video, you need an explanation sentence, and that sentence is missing. What does this quote mean? How does it relate to the aunt raising Sophie and the aunt's influence on Sophie? So that's what the writer needs to do to fix this paragraph. Here's the last body paragraph. This is the one about the grandmother. I marked this first sentence because if it's a good topic sentence, then it needs to introduce the grandmother. I don't see the word grandmother in this sentence. So I've suggested to the writer, revise the sentence. This sentence should introduce your grandmother and the influence that she had on you. And then this whole paragraph, it contains a lot of detail about how the grandmother influenced the writer as a young girl. Okay, so that's fine. Finally, the conclusion. The conclusion is pretty short, but you know, it's all right for a conclusion to be short. Basically, you need to do this first thing, and the rest of it is sort of optional. You need to restate the thesis. So I think the writer has done that. I feel so close to these stories because they remind me of the positive impact that women can have on each other. So remember, the thesis was that, you know, there's these three women who have influenced younger people. And then summarizing the main points of the essay, I think the writer's done that too. Sister Flowers inspired Marguerite, like my grandmother did with me, and Sophie loved her aunt. And then at the end, you know, depending on the topic of the paper, you might end with a recommendation, a result, or a prediction, just kind of a general sentence that brings the whole essay to a closure. And here the writer has tried to do that. Great women who are strongly connected with our lives can inspire us and play a large role in our lives. Okay, so I think this is a fairly solid essay, needs a little work, and I hope this helps you with your own revision of Essay 1.